Hi, Eric here from NHS Global. Today I want to discuss a pet peeve of mine that has long persisted in the nutraceutical industry. It's actually a misnomer, and it's so widespread that it has led many intelligent, health-conscious people into falsely believing they are doing something to improve their health, when ironically they are actually sabotaging their health. The misnomer I'm speaking of is the mischaracterization of many foods and supplements as superfoods. Now don't get me wrong, true superfoods really are fantastic. The problem is that there are so many mischaracterized superfoods which ought to be more accurately described as toxic superfoods instead. If you drink green smoothies, if you consume quote-unquote superfood supplements such as Balance of Nature, Field of Greens, Smarter Greens, Supreme Greens, or Athletic Greens, etc., if you consume beet superfood products such as Total Beets or Super Beets and others, then you will surely want to pay close attention to this presentation. But please prepare yourself to be shocked and horrified as I dispel and debunk major tenets of your health belief system. So what is a superfood, and why are so many of these quote-unquote superfoods actually toxic? I think most people, including myself, will agree that a superfood is a nutrient-rich food which is especially beneficial for health and well-being. They are typically rich in antioxidants, minerals, vitamins, fiber, flavonoids, and healthy fats. And they generally consist of organically grown whole foods, and most certainly never GMO and/or processed foods. Many people believe that fruits and vegetables, as a group, belong in this prestigious superfood category. This is where I disagree, although I do agree that some fruits and vegetables are true superfoods, but certainly not all. Allow me to explain. First of all, why is it that fruits and vegetables are so often spoken of in the same breath as if together they represent the perfect food group and ultimate superfood combination? While it's true that both fruits and vegetables can be rich in vitamins, minerals, and fiber, all good things, unfortunately, due to the widespread use of conventional fertilizers which harm the microbes in soil, most topsoils are devoid of the nutrients needed to support nutrient-rich produce. So no conventionally grown produce can be considered a superfood. Adding insult to injury, most conventionally grown produce are also sprayed with herbicides, which are extremely toxic. So it's quite apparent for any fruit or vegetable to be considered a true superfood. It must, at a bare minimum, be organically grown. Now when it comes to superfood grade fiber content, whole fresh fruits and vegetables are an absolute must. Most juices and the powdered ingredients made from juices that are typically used in most fruit and vegetable formulations have very little fiber. It's also worth mentioning that most fruits are typically very high in sugars, sucrose and fructose, depending on which fruit, both of which are very unhealthy. And of equal importance is the fact that seed oils found in many vegetables contain a high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which makes them inflammatory and very unhealthy. Clearly, fruits and vegetables in general are not as healthy as they are often said to be, although some certainly can be considered true superfoods. Now, none of what I said so far is either shocking or horrifying, as I warned, because most people already know all of this. But here's the part most people do not know. As concerning as all the points I just raised about fruits and vegetables are, the far bigger concern with many supposed superfoods is that they often contain large amounts of the long-known but often overlooked natural toxins, oxalic acid, oxalate salts, and oxalate crystals, collectively known as oxalates. Oxalates are poisonous, and consuming more than 50 to 100 milligrams of them per day is detrimental to one's health. Yet amazingly, most people have never even heard of oxalates. They are completely unaware of the harm oxalate consumption can do to their health. And they certainly do not know that many supposed superfoods like spinach, kale, Swiss chard, beets, celery, carrots, rhubarb, sweet potatoes, raspberries, almonds, and many others are loaded with oxalates, making them very unhealthy and totally unworthy of being called superfoods. As a reference point, a single serving of spinach contains about 755 milligrams of oxalates, nearly 8 times more than anyone should ever consume in a day, while a single serving of beets contain about 76 milligrams. Both of these supposed superfoods are very high in oxalates and very unhealthy to eat. But as you can see, spinach is an order of magnitude worse than beets. So what are the health consequences of consuming too much dietary oxalates? Oxalate crystals wreak havoc in all of the many places they form in the body, including the kidneys, prostate, testes, vagina, blood vessels, lungs, thyroid gland, lymph nodes, bones, joints, muscles, oral tissues, the eyes, the skin, and the brain. However, it was the trending increase in the incidence of calcium oxalate kidney stones that launched dietary oxalate research to the forefront. The long overdue attention to this important topic of research was fueled by the clinical observation that calcium oxalate stone formers tend to have elevated oxalate levels in their blood and urine. Although most urologists seem to be totally clueless about this causative relationship, the connection between dietary oxalate consumption and the increased risk of forming calcium oxalate kidney stones is undeniable. Anyone who has ever experienced a kidney stone can attest to the pain and agony they cause, not to mention the permanent kidney damage that can result if not resolved in a timely manner. So avoiding their formation in the first place by reducing the consumption of oxalates should be a goal of anyone with a history of kidney stones. Excessive dietary oxalate consumption has also been linked to kidney failure, even in people without a history of kidney stones. So clearly, the overconsumption of dietary oxalates is a major risk factor for kidney disease and should be of great concern to all health-conscious people. Other health conditions which can be brought on by regular consumption of even moderate levels of oxalate include inflamed joints, carpal tunnel syndrome, muscle spasms, fibromyalgia, lipomas, chronic prostatitis in men, vulvodynia, which is vaginal pain in women, chronic skin issues, cold hands and feet, brain fog, and mood problems. Some people may experience shortness of breath, sinus problems, yeast infections, urinary issues such as urinary tract infections, frequent urination or cloudy urine, and digestive problems such as reflux disease, irritable bowel syndrome, bloating, excessive belching, and constipation. Because it's so easy to overconsume oxalates, many people experience the typical oxalate-related aches and pains, such as stiff necks and knots or pain in the top of the shoulders or upper back, but incorrectly attribute them to normal aging rather than to oxalate consumption. Other issues, which can be indicative of oxalate overload but are rarely attributed to them, include sensitive skin, often with unexplained rash, gingivitis and periodontal disease, triggered by excessive tartar on the teeth, dry and/or itchy eyes, floaters in the eye, and twitches in the eye. Persistent oxalate consumption over time can result in the accumulation of oxalates in the body, sometimes without obvious symptoms, but may culminate years later with old age problems such as osteoporosis, chronic pain, vision impairment, and hearing loss. Oxalate overload symptoms are often accompanied by fatigue or tiredness because when oxalic acid bonds to calcium, it can interfere with cell energy production in the mitochondria. And when oxalates bond to iron in the bone marrow, it can deprive hemoglobin of the iron it needs to carry oxygen throughout the body, resulting in anemia. Oxalates also cause the depletion of the antioxidant glutathione, which may result in both a lower potential to preserve brain health and an impaired ability of the liver to detoxify. Oxalate overload can also lead to heavy metal toxicity because, Although oxalates can chelate many toxic heavy metals, such as mercury and lead, unlike other chelating agents, oxalates tend to trap the heavy metals in the tissues. The negative health impact from eating high oxalate supposed superfoods cannot be overstated and should not be controversial. Yet it is, despite there being over 200 years of science and human experience to back it up. The tragedy is that most people never make the connection between their consumption of oxalates and their health issues. And I think there are 3 reasons for this. Number 1, most doctors in general have very little, if any, education, training, or knowledge of how diet affects health. Those that do are typically misinformed, believing, for example, in the long-debunked myth that saturated fats are linked to heart disease. And even amongst the minority of doctors with knowledge about the impact diet has on health, oxalates are just not on their radar. They rarely, if ever, test for them. So patients suffering from oxalate poisoning very seldom get correctly diagnosed. Number 2, there can be a big time lag between the time oxalates are consumed and the point where they build up enough in the body to cause noticeable health problems, which makes it difficult to connect the dots. And number 3, most people are in denial because their cognitive dissonance prevents them from believing that practices they have long considered healthy, like drinking green smoothies or supplementing with their favorite fruit-vegetable supplement capsules, may actually be harming their health. Oxalate poisoning is a serious problem that has negatively impacted many people, including myself, which is why I am so passionate about getting this information out there. My own personal story is that when I was age 32, I developed hematuria, and after numerous very painful cystoscopies and other exams, was finally diagnosed with having a kidney stone. Subsequently, my stone was successfully treated with lithotripsy, and an analysis of the collected fragments confirmed it to be a calcium oxalate stone. The idea of making any changes to my diet did not occur to me at that time, so I made no changes, and 26 years later, at age 58, I was again diagnosed with having a kidney stone. Well, actually 2, 1 in each kidney. The larger stone was successfully treated with lithotripsy, and 2 years later the smaller one, which had grown, was also successfully treated with lithotripsy. Again, it did not occur to me that I should make any changes to my diet, as my thinking was 2 non-life-threatening episodes in 58 years was not of great concern to me. 2 years later, I was diagnosed with a new stone, which ended up passing on its own without the need for any medical intervention. Once again, it did not occur to me to make any changes to my diet. However, when I formed another stone 3 years later, I decided it was finally time to become proactive, and I began doing extensive research on how and why calcium oxalate stones form. This is how I learned about the relationship between the consumption of dietary oxalates and the formation of calcium oxalate stones. Among my numerous research sources was Sally K. Norton, MPH, who has put out a ton of very useful info, including a compilation of the latest and most accurate oxalate values in food. She has just published a fantastic book called Toxic Superfoods, which among other things contains recommendations and recipes for a low oxalate diet. I've been on this diet for about a year, and so far, so good. For those seeking more information, I highly recommend her book and website. The final point I want to make about my experience is that following the medical intervention for my last and hopefully final kidney stone, I was required to spend a night at the hospital. I was horrified that the hospital food they served me was extremely high in oxalate content. When I told my doctor about this, he laughed at me and said I was crazy. This illustrates my point that most healthcare professionals are absolutely clueless about the difference between a healthy and unhealthy diet, and in particular are totally oblivious that a kidney stone patient should avoid a high oxalate diet. Okay, so now that we've discussed the harmful effects of consuming too much dietary oxalate, I think it's important to understand more about oxalates and more specifically what makes them so harmful to health. Let's begin by defining exactly what oxalates are. Oxalates are substances that plants produce which are essential for the plant's growth, reproduction, and survival. They provide structural support for the plant and are involved in capturing sunlight and improving shade tolerance. They're also involved in the management of calcium, both in protecting the plant from excess calcium in the soil, as well as storing calcium which is needed during germination. And more pertinent to our discussion, they also function as a defensive weapon, protecting the plant from being eaten. Plants use oxalic acid's toxic powers to ward off a variety of predators such as fungi, insects, and other plant-eating animals, including humans. The toxic powers of oxalates have been well known throughout history. In ancient times, African hunters used to drive their wooden arrowheads before a hunt into banana tree trunks because they knew the oxalic acid contained in the tree sap was a powerful enough nerve toxin to paralyze the prey they shot with their bows and arrows. In modern times, oxalic acid, which is a registered pesticide, is used in beekeeping to kill mites that infect bees. In present day, researchers, knowing that ingesting dietary oxalates is a negative health factor, have been trying to develop spinach cultivars that are lower in oxalate, but so far they've not been able to do so. So what is it about oxalates that makes them so toxic? Well, one reason is their weapon-like structure. When oxalic acid molecules bind to minerals, such as calcium, they tend to form crystals. Plants have specialized cells that construct these crystals in a variety of shapes, ranging from rough sand to diamonds or pyramids, rectangular blocks, spiky disco balls, and long fine needles with barbed tips. As you can imagine, any of these sharp and pointy structures can be irritating to any tissue they come in contact with, just as you could imagine eating broken glass would. The needle-shaped oxalate crystals, which are called rhaphides, are particularly damaging as they are able to actually perforate cell membranes, particularly the mucosal cells that line the GI tract, causing cell death, inflammation, and leaky gut syndrome, all of which can lead to pain and to a whole host of other diseases. The cell membranes of nerve cells are also susceptible to perforation by rhaphides, which damages the nerves, resulting in functional problems throughout the entire nervous system. Chronic exposure of the oxalates in the GI tract and/or nervous system can lead to serious degenerative disease. And adding insult to injury, rhaphides carry poisons. As they puncture cells in the mouth, throat, and GI tract, they deliver oxalic acid, enzymes, glucosides, which are poisons bound to sugar molecules, and neurotoxic peptides, which have the ability to stun and paralyze those who eat them. A recent study of rhaphide crystals from kiwi fruit demonstrated that even natural vegetarians like caterpillars can die when encountering the 1-2 punch of the rhaphide crystal arrows combined with the natural toxins they deliver. Another example which demonstrates the toxic power of oxalates is the houseplant Dieffenbachia, which is famous for its ability to propel rhaphide crystals into the cells of the mouth and throat of both humans and pets. The irritating effects are very strong and typically escalate and persist due to the body's immune response. Even a momentary taste of Dieffenbachia sap can cause a massive release of histamine and temporary paralysis of the vocal cords, rendering the victim unable to speak for days. It's worth noting that oxalate crystals in foods are harder than teeth and cause tooth wear in humans. Typically, we don't experience sensations in our mouth from the oxalate crystals in the foods because we don't grind up the plant cells enough while chewing. However, when we liquefy foods with blenders and juicers, such as the case when making a smoothie, we break down the plant cells and free the crystals to attack our digestive tract. I hope this presentation has raised your awareness to the harmful effects oxalates have on health, and that many supposed superfoods which are high in oxalates should be avoided. I want to conclude this presentation with a shameless pitch for our product, Sea of Greens. If you want to enjoy the health benefits of smoothies or fruit-vegetable supplements without subjecting your health to the ravage of oxalates, then Sea of Greens, which has virtually no oxalates and contains 5 species of sea vegetables, plus 2 freshwater algae, spirulina and chlorella, is a great alternative option.